At exactly 9:17 a.m., while sitting in his kitchen scrolling through emails, Daniel realized the house he had been living in for 8 months did not legally belong to the man who sold it to him. The bank that approved his mortgage had never actually verified the title, and the real owner was on the way with a court order to evict him within 48 hours. What made it worse was that Daniel wasn't some reckless buyer chasing a deal that looked too good to be true. He was cautious, methodical, and had done everything by the book, or at least that's what he thought. Daniel lived in a quiet suburban city in a Midwestern state, the kind of place where neighbors wave at each other and houses don't usually sit empty for long. He worked in logistics, made a stable income, and after years of renting, he finally decided to buy a home. Interest rates were fluctuating, inventory was tight, and every decent listing seemed to get snatched up within days. When a modest 3-bedroom house popped up just outside the city limits, priced slightly below market but not suspiciously cheap, it felt like a rare stroke of luck rather than a red flag. The listing showed clean interiors, updated flooring, neutral paint, and a backyard that backed onto a tree line instead of another row of houses. The seller was described as a motivated owner relocating for work. The real estate agent handling the listing was responsive, professional, and oddly reassuring. She explained that the seller wanted a fast close because he had already accepted a job in another state. Everything sounded reasonable. Nothing screamed scam. Daniel toured the house twice. The seller was present both times, friendly but reserved, answering questions confidently. He had keys, documents, utility bills, and even photos of himself renovating the place over the years. When Daniel asked why the price was a little lower than comparable homes, the seller shrugged and said he didn't want the stress of months on the market. He believed him. Most people would. The offer was accepted within 48 hours. The paperwork moved fast, maybe too fast, but again, nothing looked overtly wrong. The title company cleared the transaction, the lender approved the mortgage, funds were transferred, deeds were signed, Daniel got the keys. He moved in. Life went on. For the first few months, everything felt normal. Neighbors were polite but distant. The house was quiet. Bills came in Daniel's name. Property tax notices were mailed to his address. Nothing indicated that the foundation of his new life was built on a lie. Then small things started to feel off. A neighbor casually mentioned that the previous owner had been gone for a long time. Another neighbor asked Daniel which bank finally sold it. Daniel laughed it off, assuming people were confused. He assumed wrong. One afternoon, Daniel found a letter taped to his door. It wasn't threatening, but it was strange. It stated that the sender was attempting to contact the legal occupant regarding an ownership discrepancy. No company logo, no phone number, just a name and a law office address in a nearby city. Daniel ignored it. A week later, another letter arrived, this one certified. That's when his stomach dropped. The letter claimed the house had been involved in an unresolved probate case for nearly 2 years and that the person who sold it to him did not have legal authority to do so. According to the document, the rightful owner was an estate, not an individual. Daniel called his real estate agent immediately. She didn't answer. He called again, voicemail. He emailed, no response. That night, Daniel barely slept. The next morning, he contacted the title company. They assured him everything was fine and said they'd look into it. His lender gave him a similar answer, polite, calm, dismissive. Nobody sounded alarmed, which almost made it worse. 3 days later, a process server showed up. The papers were real. The court date was real. The claim was real. The house Daniel legally purchased had been sold using forged documents, a falsified identity, and a carefully orchestrated paper trail that exploited weaknesses in the system meant to protect buyers. The scam was far more sophisticated than Daniel ever imagined possible. Here's how it worked. The man who sold Daniel the house wasn't the owner. He wasn't even related to the owner.
He was a professional impersonator working with a small network of people who specialized in targeting vacant or low-visibility properties. Houses owned by estates, houses tied up in probate, houses owned by elderly individuals in long-term care, houses owned by people who had moved out of state years ago. They would research public records, identify properties where ownership was complicated or slow-moving, then create an identity that matched just enough of the real owner to pass surface-level checks. Fake IDs, fake utility accounts, fake email histories, fake renovation photos generated months in advance. The real estate agent wasn't a victim, she was part of it. She specialized in fast closings. She knew which title companies cut corners. She knew which lenders relied too heavily on automated verification systems. She knew how to create urgency without triggering suspicion. She had done this before, many times. The title company failed because they relied on outdated databases and didn't cross-verify probate filings that were delayed due to court backlogs. The lender failed because they assumed title clearance meant ownership was legitimate. Everyone trusted the system. The system trusted paperwork. The paperwork was fake. By the time the real owner's estate realized what happened, the money was gone, wired overseas, laundered through shell accounts. The seller had vanished. The agent had disappeared. Her license would later be found revoked in another state under a different name. Daniel, meanwhile, was trapped. Legally, he was an innocent buyer. Financially, he was still responsible for the mortgage. The court acknowledged he had been defrauded, but the house itself did not legally belong to him. The estate wanted possession. The bank wanted payments. The title insurance company began looking for ways to limit liability. Months turned into legal hell. Daniel spent thousands on attorneys. He lived in constant anxiety, not knowing if he'd be forced out at any moment. He couldn't sell the house. He couldn't refinance. He couldn't stop paying. His credit, his savings, his mental health all started to crumble. Eventually, the court ruled that the property must return to the rightful owner. Daniel was given a limited settlement from the title insurance policy, far less than what he had paid, and nowhere near enough to buy another home in the same market. The bank did not forgive the loan immediately. That took another year of negotiations. Daniel moved out quietly, loading his belongings into a rental truck while the real owner's representative waited across the street. But the story doesn't end with Daniel. Investigators later discovered that the same network had pulled similar scams in multiple states, using different agents, different fake sellers, and different properties. In one case, an elderly woman returned from assisted living to find strangers living in her home legally, at least on paper. In another, a couple lost their entire retirement savings buying a vacation property that was never for sale. The common thread was always the same. No broken locks, no dramatic confrontations, no obvious crime scenes, just paperwork, emails, signatures, trust. The scariest part is that most of these scams are never fully resolved. The money is rarely recovered, the perpetrators are rarely caught, and the victims often carry the financial damage for years. Daniel still rents today. He doesn't talk about the experience much. When he does, he says the same thing every time. He says the scam didn't look like a scam. It looked like a normal transaction handled by professionals. And that's exactly why it worked. Because in real estate, the most dangerous scams aren't the ones that scream fraud. They're the ones that blend perfectly into the system, quietly waiting for someone who believes that if everything looks official, that it must be real. And somewhere right now, in a city or state you've heard of but never questioned, someone else is about to open an email, sign a document, and unknowingly step into the same trap.